Domestic violence does not discriminate. It can take on many forms, from physical to emotional abuse. And during the pandemic, as people were encouraged to stay home to remain virus-free, for many that did not mean violence-free. As advocates continue to envision a future with no domestic violence, we want to know where victims can go for help and how offenders are being held accountable. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Laurie Amata. Domestic violence is a destructive and deadly cycle that can ravage families and communities. The abuse can come in many forms, with victims ranging in age and gender. But more often than not, women are the targets. According to a report released last week by the World Health Organization, 1 in 3 women, or about 736 million, are subjected to physical or sexual violence across their lifetime. Now, experts say pressures from the COVID-19 pandemic have exacerbated the risk and danger. Shutdowns have forced people to stay home, disrupted support services, and even delayed legal proceedings when the courts were closed. Tonight, our panel looks at ways to increase awareness in hopes of bringing an end to the violence. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. All right, now to our guests. Nancy Creedman is the CEO of the Domestic Violence Action Center, or DVAC. The nonprofit offers a wide range of services to victims, including crisis support, creating a safety plan, and legal help. The organization is marking its 30th anniversary this year. Laura Dell is the manager for the Teen Alert program, which is a part of DVAC. It provides outreach and services to educate and raise awareness about teen dating violence and healthy relationships. Prior to this, she was a special education teacher. Bridget Kiabu is a domestic violence survivor. After surviving physical, verbal, emotional, and financial abuse, the mother of 3 reached out to DVAC. The agency was able to help her obtain a restraining order and find safe and affordable housing. And Steve Alm is the newly elected Honolulu prosecutor. For 15 years, he was a circuit court judge, leaving the bench in 2016. He also helped create Hawaii's Opportunity Probation with Enforcement, also known as the HOPE program. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. It's such an important topic, as it always is. And I'm going to task you with a little bit of a tough question off the top here. Maybe I'll ask you this, Nancy, first. No simple answer, but domestic violence, it just keeps happening. I know we're going to delve into different areas, but why do you feel like it still keeps happening to this day?
Well, we haven't really changed social norms and beliefs around the use of force and aggression. Men are dominant, usually. We teach little boys that they're supposed to be brave and tough and in charge and in control. And we don't teach that to little girls. That's kind of a recipe for a disaster when you get to be of the age where you're experimenting with intimacy or you're committing to an intimate partner. So until we examine the norms and the values and the beliefs and the attitudes, we will continue to have to put Band-Aids on the problem.
And Mr. Ulm, you've seen so many families come through the court system in the different capacities that you've been involved with these families. What are your thoughts when you just think at a broader level about why we're still dealing with this in so many ways?
Well, as Nancy said, it is really ingrained in people that guys think they got to be right, they got to win arguments, they resort, however it takes, resorting to violence if they can't win it verbally. And they've gotten away with it in a lot of ways and don't particularly get punished for it. It's a very difficult thing. It's the way people are raised. And so men have a, different, I think, role that we may be able to play as far as being good role models with kids, whether it's boys, showing boys how to behave a certain way, to treat your partner with respect. And girls should see that too, so that parents are treating each other with respect and arguing about things and disagreeing, but it not resorting to violence, not emotional abuse in others, and stopping people from making inappropriate comments or things that they think are funny that are not. I think things have improved on that front, but there's always more that can be done. But this is an ingrained issue in our society, and we just got to deal with it as best as we can.
You know, and I want to get to Laura and Bridget soon, but I want to follow up a little bit with you, Nancy. You know, of course, we talked about the numbers with women being abused, but there is most certainly a percentage of men who are also abused. And, you know, and I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is those cases have been on a little bit of an uptick. And you know, and I wonder if, I would imagine that the issues that you see with women apply in a lot of ways when we think about the control issues, and we'll get into, indeed, with COVID, bringing everybody closer together as well.
Well, I think the dynamic is similar, no matter who is the perpetrator and who is the victim. We haven't seen an enormous uptick in requests for help from men. But there certainly are instances, and there are men who are abused. The Domestic Violence Action Center in all of our community's programs will provide support, safety planning services, housing, legal support to anybody who needs the help, their sexual orientation, their gender orientation. This is not necessarily a binary problem. And so as a community, again, we have to go back to a very honest exploration. I really want to just offer a disclaimer, as you've pointed out, for the time that we spend together this evening, I'll be referring to victims and survivors as she and perpetrators as he, but that does not mean that we wouldn't serve a man who is being a victim or victimized or help anyone who needs our help.
Thanks, Nancy. Well, let me turn to you, Laura, because you're working with younger adults and teenagers and kids, really. Tell us more about what you've learned, what you've seen, and why the program that you're working on, is needed.
Yeah. So like Nancy mentioned, youth from a young age are not being taught what is healthy, what is normal, what is unhealthy. So it's so important that we have these conversations from middle school, high school, college, so that they know what they're experiencing isn't okay. A lot of times we ask the youth before we get started in the presentation, do you know what makes a healthy relationship? And a lot of them can't answer that. So it's clear to us that it's so important that we're having these conversations, that we're talking about consent and how to communicate effectively with your partner, because a lot of youth then will reach out after a presentation and they'll say that I have questions. I don't know what to do with my friend who's experiencing this, or, I think I see that in my own relationship. So we've definitely seen a lot of youth who have follow-up questions and need more support afterward. We get questions to our Instagram account and through our website. So they are curious and they want to learn. It's just that they don't know where to get the information. So having these presentations, outreach, teachers knowing that we're there is so important so that we can support them if they need us.
We're most certainly going to talk more about your program and what DVAC has done as far as finding other ways to reach out to people. But Bridget, I want to turn to you. It's so important that you're here and so brave that you're able to share your story. And I want you to share in your words what happened to you and what brought you to this point.
Well, just like every other survivor, a lot of survivors that you talk to, our relationship started out wonderfully. He was fantastic. We had met in Washington, and it was when we moved back to Hawaii to take care of his father that things really started to change. He really ruled our family through intimidation and fear. And as I was going back and thinking about our story, every single big incident that happened always happened in front of the children. I had two that lived with me. He has two that would come visit from the other island. And everything that happened always happened in front of the kids. So really, if we didn't stop the cycle, it would have continued to perpetuate itself. It started out with really a lot of financial abuse from the minute I dropped my bags to move to Hawaii. It was financial abuse, and then it turned to emotional abuse, and then finally ended in physical abuse.
Explain a little bit more before you go on. Financial abuse, what was happening?
When I got there, originally he told me that I didn't have to work. Then the minute I got there, you have to work. So I found a job. He didn't like the job. He didn't like the hours. He didn't think I was making enough money. So I got a different job. Same thing. And then he would tell me which bills I needed to pay. And so when you looked at what he was making and what he was paying versus what I was making and what I was paying, if there was no balance at all. I ended up with absolutely no money at the end of the month. But the biggest example of financial abuse, he came home one day with a new car for me for our anniversary. So excited because I had been driving a 20-year-old Yukon for I don't know how long. And I was very excited about this car. I posted something on Facebook. Look, my husband bought me a car for my anniversary. And an hour after I posted it, he said, yeah, by the way, I only put $2,000 down. This is what the payment's going to be. You're in charge of the insurance. And I said, well, that's a really big financial decision. Don't you think we should have made that together? And he said, well, what do you want me to do? Take the car back? And at that point, I was so worried about protecting him and his image because everybody loved him, right? So I just found a way to make it work. But then he told me that the car was in his name, not in my name. He wouldn't put it in my name. It was his name, but I needed to pay the bills. So I was building his credit while my credit was just getting trashed.
Different kinds
So
of
it
control.
was little things like that.
Yeah, and you were explaining that that wasn't the only kind of abuse.
The what?
You were explaining that wasn't the only kind of abuse.
No, that wasn't the only one. It finally, there was some pushing and shoving, but it finally ended in some physical violence one night when we came home, and I can't even remember what he was upset about, but I was ironing at the time. I put the iron on the table. I walked across the room, and he threw an iron 15 feet across the room, and it grazed past my head. My daughter, who was 11 at the time, was standing in the room, and she just caught my eye. And how he threw the iron was significant because just a year before I had suffered a massive head injury at work. So if he had hit me in the head, he would have either killed me or at the very least severely incapacitated me. So how he threw it was really deliberate. So my daughter and I decided we were going to pack up and leave because we had grab and go bags for when he got upset. And this is when the car comes into play. He said, give me the keys, that's my car. I wouldn't give him the keys, so he got his own keys, started ripping out wires out of the car, and I put my hand on his and said, please, just stop. In the meantime, my 11-year-old's out in the middle of this cul-de-sac screaming for help. He grabbed me by my thumb and threw me into the wall on the side of the house. He was 220 pounds at the time. I weighed 90 pounds. So he completely ripped my UCL. You could have taken my thumb and gone all kinds of different ways with it, but ripped my UCL. And my daughter luckily had grabbed a neighbor, and the neighbor just kind of snapped him out of it. He just literally looked at me and goes, Auntie, come with me right now. And then my ex-husband just kind of snapped out of it and walked away. But after that, I ended up in the ER. And calling DVAC was the best thing I could have done. I had a friend, I called her, I'm like, I don't know what to do. She says, get on the phone, you call DVAC right now. So I called them and I said, hi, my name's Bridget. I'm at the ER. My husband just assaulted me. I don't know what to do. And that was the best phone call I ever made.
Well, Bridget, I want to talk to you a little bit more about, how you moved past this, but I want to turn to you, Nancy, when you listen to Bridget. Before I do, I did want to put up some numbers, by the way, and we'll get to that in a minute. Thank you for reminding me, Chuck. Domestic Violence Action Center, I want to make sure that we show this at least a few times. These are numbers that people can call, whether you're on Oahu, the helpline there, 808-531-3771. There's a toll-free line as well, 800-690-6200. There's a text line, too, and we're going to have Nancy and Laura talk about that a little bit more. 605-956-5680. And there's also a website, too, that you can get this information. But in case you miss it, we'll put these numbers up more than once this evening. But again, Nancy, when you listen to Bridget talk, and share her story, what are the things that stand out to you? What are the things that are most important that you want to respond to?
Well, first I want to thank Bridget for willing to share that story. Most people keep stories like that hidden. It's usually a well-kept secret. Most of the domestic violence that occurs in our community and across the globe occurs behind closed doors, as Bridget's experience did. And part of the importance of us participating in programs like this and every other outreach attempt we undertake is to have the community understand what domestic violence really is. We, are accused of exaggerating domestic violence, like all couples fight and, women are just as bad as men are and you're making a big deal out of nothing. And then when they get a little bit better glimpse of what we're talking about real violence. And that is life-threatening and it's life-altering. Bridget's 11-year-old daughter will never forget that incident. And as a community, we bear responsibility for that. We have to rise up and respond and invest in our island families so that Bridget and her children can live free and safe from that kind of abuse. So that's what I think about. I think about the permission we must give people to talk about what they're experiencing, let them know that the Domestic Violence Action Center is here, and so are other community organizations available and prepared to help, that the prosecutor's office is working with us, the courts are working with us. We have to do this together. There's a role for every sector to play. This isn't something we can do by ourselves. Business, clergy, healthcare, academia, courts, law enforcement, everybody can play a role. And unless and until we do, it's going to remain the enormous unsolved problem that it is.
And Mr. Alm, we're going to get to you in just a minute because I want to definitely start delving into some of the legal aspects of all of this. But to you, Laura, first, when you hear Bridget talking and you think about the work that you're doing, focusing on the younger population, what do you think is the most important? What stands out to you as far as what needs to be talked about more and addressed?
Sure. So there's a lot of aspects that I think need to be talked about and addressed. So knowing what is normal and what is not in a relationship, knowing what you deserve and what to want or ask for in a relationship. So talking to youth about trust and communication, consent, and then saying, if your partner is jealous or they're trying to control who you hang out with, demanding passwords, trying to control your social media in any way, that those are not normal behaviors, that is not what you're deserving of, and you should be able to be independent and have boundaries and space from your partner. So, being able to teach that from a young age so that when you are in a relationship for the first time, you are able to practice those things, and then going forward, you continue to want and seek those healthy relationships. I think a lot of the youth, though, the images or the idea of healthy come from TV and YouTube, so maybe even their homes. And if it's not a positive model, it gets confusing. So when we can explicitly talk about it, that this is what you should be striving for and what you deserve, and this is what you can do if you aren't getting that, I think it's just really important that we are making ourselves known and that youth know that they have someone to go to, like Cafe 808.
So what also needs to be known is what legal tools there are out there and sort of what the situation is. So Mr. Alm, let's turn to you a little bit and talk about the percentages. First of all, what are the percentages as far as how many domestic violence cases get prosecuted? Is the burden of proof tough?
And call me Steve, but what we've made it a point to do coming into this. I started in this office, 26 years, or left the office 26 years ago, and the office operated a certain way, and it was still operating that way. So we decided when we came in to look at best practices around the country, look at data and research to think about how to handle these cases, because they're typically a couple thousand a year. Domestic violence misdemeanor cases. There are also domestic violence felony cases. If a bone is broken or scarring, that type of stuff. So we really looked with a fresh look, and we're going to make changes in the way we approach it. We were one of the very few jurisdictions in the country that would follow a strict no drop policy. And that came in 30 years ago. At the same time, police had mandatory arrests.
Policy.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, tell me what you mean by a no drop policy. Not everybody would know.
Well, the police would have a mandatory arrest. Somebody would come in. The prosecutors would charge virtually all of the cases with abusive family or household member typically, and then go forward with that case regardless of whether the victim wanted to proceed or not, and regardless whether the prosecution had enough evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. It was just charge ahead. And that often forced the victims to be part of the prosecution process when they didn't want to be. And so we are committed to taking a closer look at it. They should get services. All the victims should get services from groups like Nancy, from the victim advocates at the prosecutor's office. But before the first trial setting, we're going to take a real strong look at what does the victim want to do? Because as Nancy said, it's typically going to be a she. She knows her situation the best, how dangerous it is. Is she going to get beat up for even showing up in court? Is she going to get killed if she prosecutes the case? If we decide not to proceed, we'll nolly prosecute the case without prejudice, and that allows it to be brought back in the future if, say, the next time it happens, the victim does want to proceed.
Let's talk about TROs. So what is the process, the current process right now, and how would you describe it? Would you say currently the way that it's set up that it's still relatively difficult to get a TRO, or if it's easy to get a TRO?
Nancy would be a better person to ask that from the victim standpoint, because she knows who approaches it and who doesn't.
Go ahead, Nancy.
So, yeah, thanks. The courts have made it pretty easy, very straightforward to get a restraining order. The survivor goes to file a petition. It's a document where they capture what happened to them, why they're afraid. They can list a couple of examples of incidents that occur that made them feel like they needed the court's protection. It's a very, very big step for a person, and it's a very embarrassing moment to detail the intimate nature of your relationship. But the courts have done a good job of allowing victims to come in, file the petition. A judge reviews the petition, then grants the temporary restraining order ex parte, which means based on what she has reported on the petition. And then the temporary restraining order is served on the perpetrator, and both the victim and the perpetrator are ordered and expected to come back to court in 2 weeks, at which point there's a hearing in front of a judge, and the judge asks them in their own words to explain why they need the restraining order or why it shouldn't be granted. So it's a process that is well known, I think, and used by many, many people, even though it's such an enormous step. People have usually lived through a lot of abuse before they get to the point, because it's such a big step to take.
How long does a restraining order typically last, and what are the penalties if someone violates a TRO?
Well, not every temporary restraining, not every protection order. Once it goes, you go through that hearing 2 weeks later, the judge will then, based on what they've heard in court, grant a protection order. The protection order can be for 5 years, 10 years, 3 months, 6 months, whatever the victim feels she needs to protect herself and her children. So it's a uniquely tailored document that's granted by the court. There isn't a specific amount of time.
And again, what are the penalties if someone violates a restraining order?
Well, it's a misdemeanor if the person has to report to the police that the violation has occurred. The police will then have to conduct an investigation and file a report with the prosecutor's office, at which point the prosecutor's office is going to decide whether or not they're going to prosecute the violation. And maybe you want to take it from here, Steve?
Yeah, well, one of the things that people may not understand is it doesn't have to be somebody, going and threatening a victim. Again, it goes back to the power and control. So if he's supposed to stay away from her, him walking up to her and saying, "Hi, I just want to talk to you," that may seem to a casual observer as not a big deal, but he is trying to show that I can do whatever I want. And so we have trials on abuse of household member. We have trials on violating the protective orders. Each case has to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt, which is ethically what prosecutors should do. You shouldn't charge a person. You shouldn't go forward with a case unless you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But these can be, I think they are effective at controlling people's behavior. They're not perfect. A piece of paper is not going to stop a bullet, but it shows somebody the system cares about it and that you should watch your behavior, that at least a judge is involved, the legal system's involved, the prosecutor's office is involved.
Bridget, I saw you nodding your head a little bit when Nancy was talking about the difficulty of taking that step of pursuing a restraining order. Have you pursued a restraining order, and what are your thoughts about that and about that process and about taking that step?
I think the hardest step was actually just making the first phone call. Once I was connected with my my advocate, Elise, who I love, it was a lot easier because I think as a survivor, you walk in and you don't know what to do. You don't know how to navigate the legal system. It's a maze, and there's paperwork and there's all these things. So literally I sat down with Elise and she's like, this is what we need to do. Very great with the paperwork and just letting me know what needs to happen next. Walking into the courtroom though, that was really scary because that was the first time I had seen him since my assault. So that was really difficult. So it was nice that I had my advocate there with me in the courtroom. That was really helpful because I couldn't even look at him. It was really, really hard. So it was just good to have her there. And I have a 5-year, both my daughter and I have 5-year restraining orders, and I'm kind of kicking myself because I should have made it a lifetime.
Speaking of, being in court in that situation, and this, I don't think this necessarily has to do with COVID, but Steve, my understanding is that now you don't necessarily need to be there in person. And I don't recall if that was specifically tied to COVID or that's something that happened before. Talk about that a little bit, because I know that's something that a lot of victims and survivors have talked about, like just as Bridget talked about, just being there in court, having to physically be there is one of the hardest things.
Well, certain parts of the criminal justice system can be done remotely, whether it's Zoom now, whether it's, for a long time, the circuit court has done arraignments where people can plead guilty or not guilty, trial set. The defendant stays at OCCC if he's our jail, Oahu Community Correctional Center. So they don't have to transport back and forth. But the confrontation clause of our Constitution does require in trials a face-to-face meeting. Somebody has the right to have their accuser there. So you're absolutely right. This is extremely difficult. When I was a judge, some of the hardest cases were rape cases where, a victim, and one lasted so long because the guy was charged with 2 5-year counts for molesting his girlfriend's daughter, who was 13, and her friend. So I gave him 5 years on both of those, and then I extended it to 10, and then I ran them consecutive to make it 20. So the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, had made a ruling that only juries can decide that extended term. So we actually had another kind of sentencing trial 10 years after the original case. And the young woman was now in her 20s. She came into court, but I still remember her putting her head up against the witness box that comes up to where I'm sitting. And only when it came time to ask her, if you were to look around the court, would you be able to recognize anybody, the person who did this? And then she popped her head forward and looked at and saw the defendant and said, he's sitting over there, like in a blue shirt and black pants. You could see the fear on her face. It was really tough to do. So I'm totally sympathetic through it. It helps to have the advocate there. They have somebody to actually look at during the trial, sitting in the audience, so they don't have to look at the defendant. But there are a lot of brave people out there who do come to court and look at their accuser, and that's often what is critical to get the case prosecuted.
But my understanding is because of, at least because of COVID, some of these are allowed to happen virtually. Is that not the case?
Not trials.
Okay.
A trial is not. One day, who knows? But that would be fought to the bitter end by the defense bar, as far as actually, not be. Even though these days, what's happening there? People are putting on clear masks in court and doing other things, which are challenging. They fog up. It's really a challenge to do that, but it's part of our Constitution. Even though when you think about it, a real good video close up would probably show the jury more than if they're sitting at the back of the jury box. So, but face-to-face confrontation is still required.
Well, Laura, are you talking
go ahead.
about I'm just wondering if you were talking about in the restraining order proceeding?
Yes, also.
Because those can occur.
Right.
Those can.
Those are occurring, not always, but it's possible for the order to show cause hearing, which is the second step in the process. Not always, but they can occur remotely.
And sometimes both parties agree to it, so it's not a contested hearing. It just depends.
Well, let me get to.
We have a room set up in our office, which is a WebEx system, so that people can appear in court, and our attorneys can appear in court on behalf of a survivor.
Well, that's good to know, at least for part of the process there, that is an option for people. So let me get to a couple of these questions here. But one thing I wanted to mention first, this is really more of a comment, and this is for Bridget, that somebody had called in, Rowena. She said she wanted to let you know that she is so very proud of you for coming out and talking tonight, and for your bravery. So she wanted to write in and make sure that she told you that. And while we do that, maybe if we can go ahead and show those numbers one more time, because we do want to pop it up a few times here, and just make sure that anybody watching, friends who are watching, family or potential victims themselves have these numbers and know that this is out there for them when and if they need this kind of help, whether you want to call, whether you want to go to the website, whether you want to text. And again, a little bit later, we'll have Nancy and Laura talk a little bit more about the different ways that people can do that. So yeah, again, Bridget, just people out there really supporting you and showing their love for you for being here. Okay, here's one of the questions. This is from Tim calling from Kaimuki, and it's directed toward you, Steve. He says, how many cases did the prosecutor's office successfully prosecute over the past year?
Well, the conviction rate has dropped to almost nothing. And when my first 2 years on the bench as a judge, I was on that calendar, and the prosecutors won about a third of the cases then. And I hate to say it, but Judge Browning told me our conviction rate in the office in the past year has been about 3%.
Why is that?
I think it's a combination of things. I don't think the deputies were getting training. I don't think there was any, with the no drop policy, you end up going on the very weakest cases where victims do not want to testify. They don't want to be there. They're scared to be there. As a judge, I would tell the victims standing in court, because the no drop policy was in effect, I would say, you're not bringing the case. The prosecutors are bringing the case. I was saying that for the defendant's ears primarily. But he would know that if she was a part of it, that would happen. And if victims did not show up, there would, the case would get dismissed. So those are the harsh numbers. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to take a real hard look at how we could be more successful. And so victims would know if they wanted to pursue the case, everybody's there to work with them. If they didn't want to pursue, we would listen to them and make that a part of it. The police are still going to arrest people all the time. None of that is going to change. And so defendants should know if they hit their spouse or partner and the police get called, they're going to get arrested. And we will look at all the tools we can. We'll try to give the victims as much support as we can. But we want to make it a place where we're not making the victims' lives worse by doing this. And we want to support them and make it a place where justice can really be served.
Bridget, I noticed that after, we shared Rowena's comments and really thinking about what Steve is saying too about how difficult it is for survivors to talk about this, to come out and to be there, and the fact that you're here, I know that had an impact on you. What does that mean to you that she sent that message to you?
It's been amazing, and I will tell you, after I had my surgery on my hand, I went back to work the next day, and people asked me what happened and if it was appropriate, and I thought, I could impact somebody, I would tell them exactly how I got injured. And it was amazing to me that there was not one woman that I talked to that did not know somebody. It was either themselves or their auntie or their tutu or their sister that had all been in some kind of abusive relationship. And nobody really talks about it until, for me, it's just like people are saying, I've never talked to anybody about it. And I'm so surprised that you're talking about it. And I have a big mouth, so I just kept talking about it. And once I kind of got my feet under me, I just started telling my story. And as I did, more women would reach out to me. I was telling my story on Facebook, and people were messaging me and telling me, I'm in the same situation. How do I get out? What did you do? So for me, being able to say it, if one woman leaves, if one woman gets out, if one woman gets to safety, then it's all worth it to me. So I will talk for the people that can't talk, because I think one of the reasons why women don't say anything is because they feel ashamed. But here's the thing, is that we didn't do anything wrong. We're not the ones that did anything wrong. So I think we need to just kind of band together, continue to tell our stories and support one another. And it really, I'm going to try not to cry, but it really makes me feel good that someone, said thank you.
Now, Laura, I want to get back to the program and have you talk a little bit more about the program that you're working on and trying to help not only young women, but children, really. Tell us about it and why you think it's so important to start at that younger age.
Sure. So Capital 8, we do presentations to youth. We do middle school, high school, colleges, like I mentioned before. We also will do presentations for teachers, parents, community organizations, anyone who works or interacts with youth. In addition to our outreach presentations on healthy relationships, warning signs, unhealthy relationships, the different types of abuse and how to help someone, we also have 2 after-school programs. So we have a program called My Story that works with girls in middle school. It focuses on topics like self-esteem and body image and dealing with friends and relationships. It focuses on girl empowerment so that they feel, that they have a community to open up to and they are supported by their peers. We also have a new program called OPO Empowerment that we started just this semester. It is a virtual after-school program that we opened up to youth across all the islands. So we are going on our 9th out of 10 weeks. And we, same thing, talk about a variety of topics like goal setting and leadership skills, relationships, friendships. We think that it's so important to empower youth to make decisions for themselves, to learn about who they are, what they want in life, and be there to guide them in any way that we can or be adult role models for them. We are available also online. So I think I mentioned earlier, our Instagram account, our Teen Alert program, and our website, tap808.org, are great places for youth to also get information. And then I think there was another part of your question, but now I'm not sure what it was.
Well, I did want to follow up with, with the young women and the girls and their families that you've been working with. What has really stood out to you that you've learned and that they've shared with you? What has stood out?
That's a good question. I think what has stood out to me is that when youth will come to us with questions, they're not sure if they really should be coming to us. What they've experienced, they don't know if it's wrong. So, they might have experienced someone tracking them or demanding passwords and not really think much of it. So when they come to us, it's kind of with this skepticism. So we're there to provide further education and let them know that what they're experiencing, isn't what a healthy relationship is. So I would say that is maybe the most. I've also noticed oftentimes after presentations, we survey the youth and we ask if anyone wants to follow up with an advocate. And we do get a lot who say that they have questions, they know a friend, they themselves are in a relationship and they want to speak to someone. But then when we do go and reach out to them, there's silence. So I think it kind of goes to show that going back to kind of being uncomfortable coming forward or sharing your experiences, I think in the presentations they feel, that's me or this resonates, but then when it comes to getting help, they're maybe not ready yet. So it's something that we've noticed and are trying to help you.
So helping in different ways. Steve, let's get back to you talking about the criminal justice system, how it's working right now, and what else is on the table, what else you're working on, what else you're focused on to make the system work better.
Well, again, the whole approach to moving away from a strict no-drop policy is the biggest, because the two biggest associations for prosecutors are the National District Attorneys Association and the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. And I spoke to the working groups of both, the leader, Tracy Pope in San Diego. And San Diego has been a leader in domestic violence in many ways for years. And talking to her was very interesting because the data and research shows that strict policy does not have good effect on recidivism or reoffending, and that other approaches are better. So supporting the victims is critically important, giving them a choice, talking to them, hearing them, setting up good training, putting some of the best prosecutors in the office in that division that deals with domestic violence, both felonies and misdemeanors, getting the training stepped up so the cases that do go to trial, the prosecutors are prepared for it. When I worked at that office years ago and I was head of the first district and family court division, I would have the deputies in their suits on Saturday morning at 8 o'clock doing how to pick a jury, how to do opening statements, how to do direct exam, cross-exam. You don't learn that stuff in law school. You don't learn it in a book. You have to practice it in court, see other people that are good at doing it. And so we will really be stepping up the whole training area. We're doing it right now. But every year that I was on the bench and at the prosecutors, the public defenders would ask the court for a week off for training. And so when we got started here, some of the leadership team told me, why don't we ask for that week off too? Because the judges would just have private attorneys during that week. It really slowed down. So I talked to Chief Justice Rechtenwald and Mark Browning. They said, fine. So for a whole week in May, we're going to have training all day, every day in a variety of ways to help the deputies learn skills set to where they are in the office.
And Nancy, I want to turn that to you. What do you think needs to change or be improved to make the system work better for the people who need help?
That's a very important question, but it's a very complex question. The whole system has to ratchet itself up. the system has been failing survivors and their children for many years. I think Steve described some of that. We certainly see that. Law enforcement would benefit from some increased training. Currently, they participate in 3 hours of training. Best practice is 20 hours of training. You can't possibly understand the complexity of domestic violence or what you can expect to see when you respond to a domestic violence incident in 3 hours. So we need every part of the system to understand their role, to collaborate with one another, and to work together on behalf of all the people who are leaning on the system for help. Now, the law enforcement system or the criminal justice system is not the right avenue for everyone. So there are other places, businesses, for example, they have a role to play. If they are creating a supportive workplace environment, people may go to their supervisor or may go to their HR professional and try to ask for help. If their HR professional or their supervisor isn't sufficiently trained, they may not know how to guide their employee. Healthcare practitioners, medical care is a perfect avenue for people to get access. It's a point of entry for a lot of people. If we had standardized screening, universal screening by nurses, nurse practitioners, and doctors, intake at health clinics, people could disclose their fear of their partner or the risk that they're facing at home and get guided in a direction where they could get help without having to rely on the police or having to go through the court system. If you're an immigrant person or you're a member of an indigenous community or you've had a bad experience with the criminal justice system, you're not going back there. So we need to invent other ways for people to get the help they need.
Now, and of course, no offense to you, Nancy and Steve, but I think the most important person to ask this question is Bridget. With what you've been through and what you're experiencing, what do you think needs to happen? What do you think would help as far as how the system is working, what you've experienced, and what could be made better?
It's interesting. My ex-husband was arrested and charged with felony assault and felony abuse of a minor. And he spent 24 hours in jail. It was dropped to a misdemeanor, and then it was ultimately dropped. And when I called the prosecuting attorney that dropped the case, she told me that one of the reasons was because on the body cam, the police officer asked me if I wanted to go to the hospital, and I didn't want to. I was in shock. My 11-year-old's next to me sobbing. And he asked me, I said, if they come today, do I have to go to the hospital right now because it's midnight and you're in shock? And I said, no, I'm okay, because my daughter was right next to me. And I'm not going to say, no, I'm in pain, I'm in shock, I'm hurt, somebody needs to take me now. I just looked at him and I'm like, I'm okay, because my daughter's right next to me. And the prosecuting attorney said, you said you were okay. Clearly I wasn't. My thumb was dangling. So I don't even know where to begin, because in a way, I'm sorry, Steve, but in a way I feel like the court system failed my daughter and I, because I said I was okay when we all knew I wasn't. I think DVAC has been such a great resource, I know, for me and for other women as well. The more awareness there is about DVAC, because it's so rich in resources and people don't know. I think when you are in an abusive relationship, you don't even know, like the whole financial abuse thing. I didn't even realize what was going on until I was so deep in it I couldn't get out. I think there needs to be more affordable housing. So when women actually can remove themselves from the situation, I think a lot of times they stay because they don't feel like they can afford anywhere to live. And that's a problem, mostly in Hawaii, but really anywhere in the US. It's difficult to be a single mom and to leave a situation with nothing but the clothes on your back, and to find affordable housing. So there's so many moving pieces to making this all work. That makes
Steve,
sense.
I know you wanted
Laura.
to jump in there, Steve, and just and feel free to comment. I just wanted to add to a question about somebody asking about emergency housing. Is there enough emergency housing and funding for women who are in need? But feel free to respond, and also, if you don't mind, respond to that question as well.
Well, and no need to apologize. That's training for the prosecutor. The fact that you said they're okay, given the circumstances, shouldn't have made any difference. Injuries like that are rare to see in court, and clearly show it's a felony. And that case should have proceeded to trial. It sounds like a solid case. There's all sorts of evidence that is not present in most. It's horrible what happened to you, but that's the kind of thing that is good evidence to put in front of a jury. Because I have to say, not putting any jurors down, but the defense is going to play every stereotype, everything against the state's witness, the victim. And some of the time the jurors buy into it because their knowledge of domestic violence is very limited. And so what you're describing, in that situation is a training problem that the prosecutor should have been better trained and proceeded to trial on that case.
Now, we've only got about 5 minutes left, but Nancy, maybe to you about this question about emergency housing and funding.
Yeah.
What's the situation?
I have two thoughts about that. One is emergency shelter is available, but emergency shelter only goes so far. After 90 days, then what? As Bridget pointed out, many people are forced to return to a dangerous environment if they can't seek an alternative. Secondarily, as a community, we have to have a greater investment and a bigger priority in addressing the problem of domestic violence from every sector. So we can't just have relying on the prosecutor or relying on the police, but we need affordable housing, we need emergency shelter, we need advocates, we need legal services, we need more judges, we need courtrooms, we need youth programs, we need teachers trained, we need healthcare providers trained. The whole thing really speaks to that safe families are at the core of a healthy community. And if we are not taking care of our families, it is going to go with them to school or go with them to work or go with them to court or go with them to jail or cost us a fortune.
Now, we only have got a few minutes left, and I want to throw up these numbers again when I ask this question, but I really wanted to make sure I asked all of you, and this goes to Lonnie's question about what can we as a community do to help those experiencing domestic abuse? And, what if they suspect someone is being abused, things to look out for? Maybe we'll start with you, Nancy.
Well, when the stay-at-home directives were first put in place, the first thing we did was try to get the media allies that we have had that have been so generous with us to tell the community that we know people are being hurt behind closed doors, and to tell other people, if you know somebody who you suspect could be suffering the harm of abuse, reach out to them, let them know that you care about them, let them know that you're a resource. Listen with an open heart. There's a lot of victim blaming, like, is there something that she did that caused this problem to occur? So as a community, we have to say to people, we care about you, we care about your safety, and guide them to places where they can get real help, like the Domestic Violence Action Center.
And Laura, to you, for the younger folks out there who need help, what do you want them to know? What do they need to look out for? What's the most important things?
Sure. So for youth, one of the biggest signs that we see is isolation. So, they no longer hang out with their friends or family, their demeanor changes. For teachers, things to look out for could be drops in grades or, attendance, but that obviously is hard now with school being online, so more so in person. Just kind of changes in behavior, the way that they present themselves on social media, the way that they dress. They're going through this change and maybe it's associated with their new relationship. So realizing that there could be something else behind that.
Now, Bridget, I want to get to you in just a minute, but really quickly, Steve, any other thoughts as far as most important for people to know right now?
Well, because people are at home, kids aren't going to school, so teachers don't see bruises and injuries, so they're not able to report it. Other people, women working at home, may not be at work, so people can't see it. If people see a kid with black eyes, they should call the police. You see people with those kinds of injuries, call the police. The police aren't the only answer, but it is an answer, and having the police show up can have a good effect.
Thank you, Steve. And Bridget, for the folks who are watching, for maybe the women who are watching right now who might be thinking about picking up that phone, what do you want to share with them?
Pick up the phone, make the phone call. The first words that come out of your mouth are going to be the hardest ones because you're going to be embarrassed, you're going to be scared, and part of you is going to be excited because you know that there's a beginning, there's an end to this whole thing. But I would say make the phone call because there really is light and life and goodness at the end of this really dark tunnel that you've been in.
Well, Bridget, thank you so much, and all of you for being here. And we show the information that's always available for anybody out there who needs it. You've been doing more as far as providing abilities for them to text and chat as well, and so different opportunities in case they're in a dangerous situation. So thank you for continuing to provide those resources. And mahalo to you for joining us tonight. We thank our guests, Nancy Creedman, CEO of the Domestic Violence Action Center, Teen Alert Program Manager Laura Dell, domestic violence survivor Bridget Kiabu, and Honolulu prosecutor Steve Alm. All right, next week on Insights, the battle over residential waterfront development in Kaka'ako Makai dies in the legislature, but the Office of Hawaiian Affairs says it will continue its fight despite some community opposition. We're going to hear from both sides. Please join us then. I'm Laurie Amata for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Ahui ho.